Somewhere right now, there's a basil plant crammed into a chipped pot outside a pizza place, half shaded by a dumpster, getting watered whenever someone remembers to dump a glass out the back door. It's enormous. It's been going since May. Meanwhile, you bought a gorgeous little basil plant from the grocery store, set it proudly on your windowsill, watered it like clockwork, and within 10 days it was yellow, droopy, and halfway to the compost bin. Sound familiar? Here's the part nobody tells you when you're standing in the herb aisle. Basil isn't actually delicate. It's one of the toughest herbs you can grow once you understand the handful of things it actually needs. The problem is that almost every piece of basil advice floating around online is either too vague to matter or just plain wrong, and that's exactly why so many plants die before the 4th of July. So today I'm handing you 7 secrets that separate a basil plant that gives up in 2 weeks from one that feeds you all summer, survives the brutal stretch of July and August heat, and sets you up for next year without buying a single new seed packet. These aren't the tired, give it sun and water tips you've already heard. Stick around for secret number 6, because it's the one thing that makes people rip out a perfectly healthy plant in a panic, and once you know it, you'll never make that mistake again. Let's get into it. Secret number 1. Cut it before you think it's ready. Almost everyone treats a new basil plant like something fragile to be protected. You let it grow tall, you admire it, and only once it's big and impressive do you finally start snipping leaves off for dinner. That instinct is exactly backwards, and it's quietly setting your plant up to become a single skinny stalk instead of a full bushy producer. Here's what you should be doing instead. The moment your basil has 3 or 4 sets of true leaves, pinch or snip off the very top of the main stem, cutting just above a pair of leaves. It feels wrong to cut a plant that's barely started, but basil grows in a very specific way. Right below any cut, 2 new stems emerge from that leaf joint instead of 1. So a single cut early on doesn't just delay growth, it doubles it. Do this again a few weeks later on each new stem, and you're not growing a stalk anymore. You're growing a shrub with dozens of growing points instead of 1. This is also your long-term harvesting rule, not just a one-time trick. Every time you need basil for the kitchen, don't strip leaves off the bottom or the middle. Cut whole stems from the top just above a leaf pair the same way. A plant harvested this way keeps getting bushier and more productive as the summer goes on. A plant harvested from the bottom just gets taller, leggier, and more likely to flop over and bolt. Cut early, cut from the top, and cut often. Secret number 2. Water the roots, never the leaves. Basil has a reputation for being thirsty, and that reputation gets people into trouble because they respond by giving it small splashes of water every single day, right over the top of the plant. That's close to the worst way to water basil. Wet leaves sitting in the humid air are an open invitation for fungal problems, and shallow daily sips train the roots to stay near the surface instead of growing deep, which makes the plant even more dependent on you. Here's the fix. Water deeply and less often, aiming at the soil around the base of the plant rather than the foliage. You're looking for roughly 1 to 2 inches of water a week, delivered in a way that soaks down several inches rather than just wetting the surface. Check by pushing a finger about 2 inches into the soil. If it's dry down there, water thoroughly until it runs out the bottom of the pot or soaks well past the root zone in the garden. If it's still damp, leave it alone. Watering in the morning gives any splashed leaves time to dry in the sun, which matters even more once summer humidity climbs. A 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch around the base slows evaporation dramatically, which means your basil can go longer between waterings without the soil turning into a bone-dry crust. Deep and dry. Deep water at the roots. Dry leaves at all times. That single habit prevents most of the fungal disease. And half the wilting people blame on bad luck. Secret number 3. Give the roots room to actually live. This one gets skipped constantly because it happens before the plant shows symptoms. If you're growing basil in a container, size matters far more than people assume. A basil plant crammed into a small 4 or 6 inch nursery pot for its whole life is a stressed plant, and a stressed plant is a plant that's already halfway to giving up on making leaves for you. Give it a pot that's at least 12 inches across and holds 2 to 3 gallons of soil with real drainage holes at the bottom. In the ground, give it space too, roughly 12 to 18 inches from its neighbors, in soil that's rich with compost and drains well rather than staying soggy. Cramped roots overheat faster, dry out faster, and run out of nutrients faster, pushing the plant straight toward the stress response we're about to cover in Secret 4. Think of this as the invisible secret. Nobody notices root space until it's already too late and the plant has bolted or stalled out. Fix the room it has to grow in, and you remove a huge chunk of the stress that causes every other problem on this list. Secret number 4, win the war on the flower buds. This is the single most important habit for keeping basil alive and productive specifically through July and August, because this is exactly when basil wants to stop making leaves and start making seeds. Once daytime temperatures start regularly climbing past 80 degrees and the days are at their longest, basil reads those signals as a countdown clock. It shifts its energy from leaves to reproduction, sending up a tall central shoot with a cluster of small flower buds at the tip. This process is called bolting, and once it really gets going, the leaves get smaller, tougher, and noticeably more bitter because the plant has essentially clocked out of leaf production. Here's the good news. You can override this signal almost completely with one habit. Walk past your basil every 2 or 3 days and scan the tips of every stem for the first sign of a flower bud, a tiny tight cluster forming at the growing point. The second you spot one, cut the stem about an inch below that bud, back down to a healthy pair of leaves. Don't wait for a convenient moment. Do it immediately. This single habit, repeated relentlessly through the hottest stretch of summer, is what keeps a basil plant productive for months instead of finishing its whole life cycle by the end of July. Miss this check for even a week during a heat wave, and you'll come back to a plant already committed to flowering, with leaves that have lost most of their sweetness. Secret number 5. Break up the afternoon blaze. Basil genuinely loves sun and heat, and for most of the season, 6 to 8 hours of direct light is exactly what you want. But there's a specific window, the hottest stretch of July and August afternoons, where that same sun starts working against you. When soil temperatures spike in the early afternoon, basil responds with exactly the kind of stress that accelerates bolting and can cause the whole plant to wilt dramatically even when the roots have plenty of water. The fix isn't to move your basil into shade all day. It's to break up just the harshest 2 or 3 hours, roughly early to mid-afternoon, with something that casts dappled shade. A taller companion plant, a patio umbrella, a length of shade cloth, or simply moving a container to catch a fence's shadow during that window. Reducing the soil temperature by 15 or 20 degrees during peak heat makes a real difference in how much stress the plant experiences. Combine this with the heavy mulch layer from Secret 2, and you've built a basil plant that can shrug off a genuine heat wave instead of collapsing under it. This is also exactly the kind of thing that makes basil forgiving of your schedule. A plant with shaded roots and a break from the harshest afternoon sun can handle you forgetting to check on it for a few extra days because you've already removed the worst of the stress before it ever started. Secret number 6. Learn to read a wilting basil before you panic. This is the moment I told you to wait for because this is where most people either overreact and pull a perfectly fine plant out of the ground, or underreact and let a genuinely sick plant spread trouble to everything nearby. Here's the situation. You walk outside on a scorching afternoon and your basil looks completely defeated, leaves drooping, whole plant sagging like it's given up. In the vast majority of cases, it's simply losing water through its leaves faster than the roots can resupply it in the heat of the day. And it is not an emergency. Check back in the early evening or the next morning. If the plant has bounced back and looks perky again, that was ordinary heat stress, and the fix is simply the watering and shade habits from Secrets 2 and 5, not a rescue mission. But there is a second kind of wilt that looks similar at first glance and behaves completely differently, and this one you do need to take seriously. If you notice yellowing that starts on the lower, older leaves and often shows up on just one side of the plant first, if the wilting doesn't reverse overnight, even in cool, damp soil, and if you slice into a stem and see brown discoloration running through the inside, that's a fungal disease, most commonly one called fusarium wilt. Unlike ordinary heat wilting, this version does not recover, and it will not respond to more water or more shade. The honest truth is that once a plant is showing these symptoms clearly, it typically cannot be saved, And the right move is to pull the whole plant, including its roots, and throw it away rather than composting it because the fungus can live in that soil for years and infect anything you plant there afterward. The skill here isn't preventing every wilt. It's telling the difference between a plant that's simply thirsty and dramatic and a plant that's genuinely sick, so you stop panicking over the first one and stop wasting weeks hoping on the second one. Secret number 7. Feed it light and bank seeds for next time. The last secret covers both how you feed basil through the season and how you carry it forward into the next one. Basil does need feeding, but it's easy to overdo it. And overdoing it comes with a hidden cost most people never connect to their plant. Too much nitrogen, especially from strong all-purpose fertilizers, pushes basil into fast, oversized leaf growth. But research on the plant's essential oils shows heavy feeding can noticeably dilute the very compounds that give basil its flavor and aroma. A bigger, blander plant. The better approach is a balanced fertilizer with roughly equal amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium used at half strength, worked in every 4 to 6 weeks for younger plants and less often as they mature. You're aiming for steady, moderate growth, not an explosion of watery leaves. Now, here's how this ties into next season. Since basil naturally slows down and ages as summer wears on, don't rely on just one planting to carry you through. Start a new small batch of seeds every 2 to 3 weeks from spring through midsummer. So a fresh young plant is always coming up right as an older one starts to tire out. Then, sometime around the start of July or August, depending on your climate, choose 1 or 2 of your healthiest plants and stop pinching their flower buds entirely. Let those specific plants bolt on purpose, let the flowers mature into seed pods, and wait for those pods to dry and turn from green to tan on the plant itself. Once they're fully dry, crack them open, collect the tiny black seeds, and store them somewhere cool, dark, and dry. Those seeds are your entire next cycle, ready to start the whole process over next spring without spending $1 at the garden center. So let's bring all 7 together, because they're not really separate tricks, they're one connected system. You cut it early and often so it grows into a bush instead of a stalk. You water the roots and keep the leaves dry so disease never gets a foothold. You give the roots room so the plant never starts life-stressed. You win the daily war on flower buds so it keeps making leaves straight through the hottest stretch of summer. You break up the worst of the afternoon heat so it never has to fight the sun and the calendar at the same time. You learn to tell an ordinary afternoon droop from a real disease, so you stop panicking over nothing and stop hoping over something serious. And you feed it lightly while quietly banking seeds for next year so this season's basil plant becomes next year's basil plant too. Do all 7, and you don't just get an herb that survives the summer. You get one that outproduces everything else in your garden and rebuilds itself year after year with almost no help from you. If this changed how you think about growing basil, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of plant. The ones everyone assumes are fussy but are actually just misunderstood. New deep dive guides drop every week, and the next one might be the plant you've already given up on. Down in the comments, tell me this. Has your basil ever gone from thriving to collapsed overnight? And did you know at the time whether it was heat or something more serious? Or are you sitting on one of those absurd, unkillable basil plants that just refuses to stop producing? I read every comment and they genuinely shape what I cover next. Now go check your basil for flower buds, and I'll see you in the next one.